Well, I think the idea that we should take a lateral flow test before we go out to do our Christmas shopping is frankly ridiculous. I mean, it seems to me that thankfully, we are in such an amazingly different position than we were this time last year. That's thanks to the vaccine and thanks to the vaccine rollout. Things could not be more different. This time last year, we were looking at steep increases in hospitalisations, and we were talking about lockdown and Christmas being cancelled effectively. This year, that's just not the case at all. We don't have that huge rise in hospitalisations. The numbers of people in hospital have actually been coming down for the past few days. This is a real success story, and it suggests to me that we need to learn to live with COVID now. We need to be able to get on with our lives, to see our friends and family, to go about and do our Christmas shopping and act as normal. And normal is not taking a lateral flow test before you nip out to pick up a few things from the shops.
But what about, though, some might argue, well, actually, it's not a mandate, it's not a rule, it's just a choice. And some might say, well, actually, it's common sense. If I'm going to go somewhere busy, I might as well test that I've not got anything before I go. So is it not just common sense?
Well, we don't routinely test ourselves for flu, for example, and flu can be a serious killer for elderly people, particularly in the winter. And yet the idea that you'd routinely take a flu test before you go out, that's never been raised. That's not something that we do. And I think people should be sensible. Clearly, if you've got symptoms of COVID, you stay at home, you take a test, you don't go out if you're feeling ill and spread the virus around. But the idea that people who are feeling absolutely fine, up for going Christmas shopping, want to go out and get on with their lives, should be taking tests before they go out. Like I say, it's just not normality. It seems to me the aim of this really is to keep the virus at the forefront of our minds and to keep us essentially living in fear of this virus and not carrying on with our normal lives.
Well, I mean, first of all, we don't take flu tests because there aren't any. The only way you can do a flu test is if you're actually in hospital. So they're the only places for that. It seems to me that mitigations alongside the booster campaign are the way forward. We've got infections still going up. 1 in 64 of us have got COVID at the moment. And so the idea of doing lateral flows before you go out, yeah, it seems like a good idea. Before you get there, though, you should have mandatory masks, which is why I think that Boris Johnson should have brought in his Plan B alongside the booster campaign.
But Nigel, cases are not going up. I mean, that's factually inaccurate. Cases have actually been coming down.
Well, there were 45,000 yesterday, which was up from the previous day.
But if you look at this over the course of the past 2 or 3 weeks, about a month ago we had this big panic and calls to bring in Plan B, and people were saying cases are increasing. The next day, they fell and they came down every
and then they went up again. So, OK, well, we could agree that they're plateauing.
Like, there's various countries that do indeed have things like your COVID passes, your mask mandates, things that you're calling for, whose cases are flying up. So they can't be that effective, those measures.
Well, it depends where you are. I mean, someone like Spain, which has got a low case rate, they have mandatory masks in schools, so...
Awful.
Well,
awful.
Except that in our schools we've got 1 in 20 kids who have got COVID.
And
in Spain,
it hardly
it's much
hurts
less.
them. You surely don't advocate mandating masks on kids.
I would in schools, yes, absolutely.
You wouldn't, Nigel. So you would make a child sit there for 8 hours a day, or whatever it is that they're at school these days, 8 hours a day with a piece of ineffective paper or cloth often on their face.
It's not ineffective, but the point I'm making is that you keep the mitigations in place to stop another lockdown. And once the cases do start going down
cruel,
to a reasonable...
8 hours for a child to be essentially facially muzzled. You don't think that's cruel?
Well, I mean, facially, it's going a bit far to say facially muzzled. You'll make it sound like they're dogs.
I'll correct my language. Masked. Children, up to 8 hours a day masked. You don't think that's cruel?
Well, they would have plenty of time to take it off. They would go out in the playground and do other things, so it wouldn't be a constantly masked up.
I'll give you some side effects, by the way, of mask constant. Potential development of facial skin lesions, potential headaches and breathing difficulties, potential increased risk of self-contamination due to the manipulation of face masks and touching them, potential discomfort, potential development issues, difficulty communication for deaf people. There are side effects.
And they still might be glasses too.
I think it's awful suggesting mandating children. I really do. Peter, where do you stand on all this?
Well, I've got to say, sorry, your intro wasn't quite right. I'm not here representing my employer at all. I'm here independently. In terms of lateral flow test for
Well,
shopping.
that told us, and whoever wrote that introduction, I hope it told you as well for the next time.
In terms of lateral flow test for shopping, if it's not the law, then it's just voluntary. There's only going to be a partial take-up, isn't there? And we've had this before, government saying it'd be nice if the whole country did X, Y, Z precautionary measure, but they either introduce the law or they don't.
So what would you prefer that they did? Would you prefer that they introduced a law, or are you OK with it as it is?
No, I'm OK as it is. I don't think introducing a law to go shopping is necessarily going to help because it couldn't be enforced. I think it's up to people to kind of make the right judgment for them and their family.